Okay. So I think that we can get started, y'all. So hi again, welcome everybody. We're definitely glad that you all can join us for this webinar. This is the next webinar in our Network Commons series, which is exploring community-led racial healing models to deepen partnerships between community development and healthcare. So my name is Kevin Leacock. I'm a program manager at Build Healthy Places Network, where I primarily coordinate and manage our community innovations for racial equity initiative. And I'm coming to you today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So, as I continue on with the introduction, continue typing in names and where y'all from and things like that, just so we get a sense about who's here. But first, I think a little bit about Build Healthy Places Network for those who are unfamiliar with our work, and for those who are familiar, just a little bit of a reminder. So we're a national center with the mission to foster cross-sector collaboration across healthcare, public health, and community development to help accelerate community-centered investments in racial equity. We are a program of the program of the Public Health Institute, and as mentioned a few moments ago, I manage our community, the Community Innovations for Racial Equity project, which I like to call the SIRE for short, because that can be a mouthful, obviously, for me right now. So SIRE, C-I-R-E, is our project. We, with the funding from the Kresge Foundation and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, launched SIRE to, help support 10 BIPOC-led community development corporations in their effort to build internal capacity, community power, explore innovative community ownership models, and to address the barriers and gaps within community development and health partnerships to more effectively advance racial equity. So SIRE is an 18-month initiative where the cohort is designed to be more of a safe space that allows the leaders of BIPOC-led CDCs to connect and validate each other's experiences and challenges, that are encountered in their respective work. So far, honestly, it's been a pleasure to work with these different groups. And we have actually two individuals from the cohort joining us today for this conversation. So we definitely look forward to our continued partnership. So with that said, I'm definitely excited to also, be joined by you all and have this conversation. So once again, thank y'all for joining. So where we are now in this conversation, we're going to move forward and we're going to have someone talk about, the bios will be put in the chat for each individual. So thank y'all again for joining. So first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anjali LaFleury, who is the co-executive director of operations and development for the Siupali Collective, part of our SIRE cohort. So the Collective is a nonprofit organization that supports urban indigenous families to reconnect with ancestral knowledge, as they like to say, from the womb to the tomb. Anjali is, she's applying her varied experiences within the nonprofit sector to support her community through revitalizing traditional knowledge and promoting and advocating for health and wellness. Next, I'd like to welcome Amaha Selassie. He is co-founder and co-executive director of Co-op Dayton, also a part of our SIRE cohort. Co-op Dayton is a co-op incubator guided by the values of participation, innovation, social responsibility, and cooperation with a vision that builds toward a just economy ecosystem. He is co-founder and board chair of the Gem City Market, a community-driven effort to address food apartheid through a food co-op dedicated to increasing access to fresh fruits and vegetables within West Dayton. And finally, I'd like to also welcome Dr. Isela Palayo. Isela is a program officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, working on the foundation's racial equity and community engagement efforts, supporting thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. She supports local community leaders of multi-sector collaborations, implementing the truth, racial healing, and transformation efforts, and has led strategy and coordination for the National Day of Racial Healing. So once again, thank you all for coming. I'm definitely glad to see you all here. Yeah, I think definitely glad to those watching online, right? So before we hop into it, I think that we're all pretty familiar with, Zoom by now, but for me, just want to just make sure that when we have the Q&A section, the Q&A is for questions, the chat is for tech issues and any resources. And I'm going to be honest, we're going to have a lot of resources, a lot of things that we will share in the chat. And so the chat will be flooded today. So hopefully you can click on that and then save those things and then, look at those resources at like a later date. So yes, so Q&A for questions, chat for tech issues and resources. All right. So with the intro out of the way, I think we can get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, why we all came today, right? So before we begin our conversation with today's panelists, I'd like to welcome again Dr. Isela Pelayo to tell us a little bit about her work and specifically to discuss more about Kellogg's truth, racial healing, and transformation efforts. So Isela, can you give us a little bit of background on what you've been learning around racial healing and supporting communities engaging in these multi-sector collaborations?
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, everybody. And just so really happy to be here in this important conversation. And thanks, Kevin, for that question. Looking forward to hearing from our panelists a little bit later. I'm happy to share a little bit about our racial equity efforts, racial healing efforts at the Kellogg Foundation and the work that we've been supporting as part of the racial equity and community engagement team with my colleagues. We cultivate a grant-making portfolio where community partners support and center racial healing, narrative change, and community power building in their work. And in addition to that, I've helped steward the Kellogg Foundation's work with the National Day of Racial Healing to raise awareness about the need for racial healing and also highlight really great work that's been done in that space. And that's connected to the Kellogg Foundation's Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation efforts. I'm going to just call it TRHT because that's a mouthful. TRHT is a comprehensive, multi-year national and community-based process to bring about transformational and sustainable change. Through TRHT, partners address the historic and contemporary effects of racism in their communities and institutions, and they work to replace the deeply held belief system that fuels racism with one that sees the inherent value of all people, our shared humanity. TRHT was designed with community and came out of a deeply collaborative process that involved nearly 200 people and organizations. And TRHT is part of a decades-long racial equity approach to the Kellogg Foundation's work. We view racial healing as key to our foundation's efforts to achieve racial equity. We see racial healing as the heart of racial equity. And getting to this place was a long journey for the foundation. It didn't happen overnight, I'll say that. Racial healing is a process that restores communities to wholeness, repairs damage caused by racism, and transforms societal structures. And we believe that all people have the inherent capacity to affect change in their lives, organizations, and communities. And so we support communities with resources to self-determine the solutions they identify, and recognizing that many of the issues that communities of color are contending with were not of their own making. So we want to be clear about that. So often work to change systems is siloed and transactional. I'm sure some of you have experienced that. And even when there are policy wins, they tend to be short-lived and the system snaps back, the cycle repeats. What's often missing is a conversation about people, the actual people, like how do we invest and nurture relationships? How do we create mechanisms and practices to support relationship building and trust building so that whatever we do achieve at the systemic level, it has staying power. And so TRHT was an innovative pilot that launched 6 years ago. The foundation supported several communities to engage in place-based racial equity strategy, and where you're centering racial healing as a way to get there. And so what would it really look like for us to support community as it leads its own visioning processes to reimagine a better future? And who really needs to be at that table to dream, to plan, and to do that work? So in short, if you were to ask me, what is the theory of change for TRHT? It's this. If communities work towards a strategy for truth-telling to disrupt harmful narratives and deeply focus on building trust and relationships to help build and strengthen collaboration and local coalitions, then these local coalitions and collaborations are better positioned to work together for the long haul and have that sustainability to advance the local transformation across important sectors. And in TRHT, we name separation as communities being kept apart from each other, law and the economy as framework areas, though fully recognizing that there are several sectors, institutions, and organization types that overlap across these broad areas. So what's really important though here is that communities lead the conversations, that they identify the issues and sectors to focus on, that they generate solutions, and that they make decisions. And so I want to share just a little bit of the learnings that we've gotten so far, 6 years into this work, is from our TRHT partners that are doing this work locally. I'll share the shocker here. I'm sure you're probably aware. Doing the work of building trust and relationship actually takes more time than you think it will. It just takes time because you have to invest and nurture relationships. And this means we have to be intentional and have mechanisms and practices to do this. It's not just going to happen. And you have to be patient and keep working at it. And so it's not just about building new relationships. We also have to think about how we repair relationships and make sure that we have effective ways to engage conflict and tension, because that's going to happen. We're human, and ways to address harm. So it's not a one and done thing. You have to commit to doing this work and developing a practice around and a muscle around using racial healing, trust, relationship building practices. And that's going to be important long before you need to call upon these networks and relationships and before you see the fruit of this work. What we're learning is that multi-sector, multi-generational, and cross-racial coalition and collaboration is thriving and expanding in places where there was a strong focus on nurturing and developing local racial healing and trust building infrastructure. And we've learned this through social network analysis. Those communities that were focused on repairing relationship have done really amazing things. And I don't have a lot of time to tell you about that, but I do want to say a couple things. Just one, by infrastructure, I mean using racial healing practices as part of the how the work gets done. It's not another thing, it's the how you do the thing. And so really it's part of your meetings, it's part of your convenings, it's really figuring out how to identify, train, build a network of local healing practitioners that are already doing this work. It's about creating opportunities to incorporate racial healing as part of the work that you do and inviting other people to experience it too. I'll give one example before handing this back over to Kevin and to hear from our panelists. But one thing that we saw, especially in COVID, is that, again, where folks were really intentional about creating the space for racial healing, those TRHTs were able to really spring into action and then mobilize and coordinate responses across sectors. So I have two examples, and I'll just pop in later a quick link to a video so you can see some work happening in Flint. As many people are aware, Flint had a water crisis, and they share in their own words what that was like. They talk about it as a crisis of a democracy, a crisis of trust at institutions of all levels. And they frame the way they talk about their work as multi-sector problems requiring multi-sector solutions. And so they started doing TRHT right around that time when the water crisis was happening. And so when the COVID pandemic hit, they had been taking time to repair relationship and work together. So when the COVID pandemic hit, they were ready. And they were able to quickly mobilize and put together a task force to address a lot of the issues that didn't quite go the way they wanted. And so I'll stop there because I know I want to make sure I'm respectful of our panelists who I'm going to learn so much about. But there's so many other examples. And if you want to learn more, you can go to healourcommunities.org, where we have a collection of knowledge briefs where TRHTs actually share their own insights and learning in their own words. And you can access a wide range of resources there as well. But really exciting. And also we'll be sharing more newer resources in the coming months as well. So I'll stop there and thank you so much.
No, yes, thank you so much. And we would definitely, talk more about that, repair and community in our panel discussion. And thank you very much, Ashley, for putting that in the chat. So definitely look at those resources, healourcommunities.org, with some more things around, TRHT. So I guess now we can bring in our two panelists and really have a conversation around racial healing and things like that. So welcome again, y'all. I guess what I can do, we can start today's conversation just, asking like a little bit about your organization, right? First and foremost, but also why racial healing? Why is racial healing even a conversation? Why is it important? Why should we be centering it or incorporating it into our work, right? And then also, if you could describe your approach to centering racial healing to address those historical traumas and harms that we said that need to be repaired. So Anjali, let's start with you.
Okay, easy question, right? So let me start with hopefully the easier part. And so good morning, good afternoon, wherever you all find yourselves. Just want to acknowledge that I'm here on Camille O'odham territory and also Peepush territory. I want to acknowledge my ancestors and also all of your lineages as well. So let me like try to give the 1 minute version of what the collective does, because there's so much. The word Siwapatli is a Nahuatl term that stands for women's medicine. So we originated responding to a call from one of our co-founders, Maria Paracano, who was, she had just birthed her second child, and her mother had also recently passed away. So you can imagine, right, all the postpartum issues that were going on at that point, in addition to what was naturally going on with the adjustments in her body and that which was going on in her lifetime. So birthing, healing, for the first 4 years, we focused on ourselves as a group of women. Not everyone were mothers. Not, most of us were. Or not all of us were mothers, most of us were. And that really meant of how we healed our bodies. And then that connection to our bodies, and also wanting to raise our children and those that we loved with centering Indigenous values. And indigeneity for us just means where you came from, right? So we have a very, could call it a pan-Indigenous group or a rainbow tribe. There's lots of terms. None of us, well, for very few of us, are these lands our homelands. We're perpetual guests, right? So it's just kind of like, how do we live in two worlds? We often talk about it as in how do we walk in two worlds? Being professionals, being moms, being aunties, right? And still living with the values that we hold dear when there's so many tensions and things pulling on that. And around, so originally that started with a lot of birth work, body work, and things focused on healing our wombs, actually, specifically. And then around year 4, that shifted, and we started getting a lot of media attention at the time of the pandemic. And then land became central, and we actually received and got an office. And that actually allowed us to recognize that that little garden that we had in the back had everything that we needed for to heal our bodies as it related to every reproductive event, from termination to end of life to postpartum to pregnancy. And then also that food was at the center of everything that we always did. And so then land restoration and food justice became important. Fast forward now, we're in our 8th year, and we're about to receive the deed for a piece of land, a huge piece of land, 7 acres, and where we hope to build a wellness center, a food forest, a teaching kitchen, thank you, Amma, a teaching kitchen, and a storefront, and many other things. So that's like more than a minute, but like, I don't know how to not ground you all in place, with what we're doing. And yes, thank you. There's a video if y'all want to have more information, if I sped through that. Racial healing, 2 minutes, right? How do we do that? I think the way that the collective, I was going to say is chosen to do that, but I think the way that chose us, right? If we center ancestral knowledge, if we center traditional knowledge, it's us going back to knowing ourselves individually. We say a lot, reawakening our own DNA to tap into that ancestral knowledge, prioritizing keeping kind of ceremonies and our that component of our lives central to the organization. And that's that element of knowing that you're walking in two worlds. There very much is the spiritual component of who we are, and then there's the nonprofit component, right, of who we are. And I think we've have really, I don't want to say fought, but been very intentional about intersecting that and not giving up one for the other, and being really intentional about in which space we're working and operating. As we moved into this space with the 7 acres, now has come more of us engaging with other groups, right? So there's our individual racial healing, there's the ways that we're healing ourselves. And then when we intersect, right, and we kind of step out, and that's what it felt like at the 4-year mark, it felt like coming out, right? Then it was like, okay, now we also have to deal with the history of the land that we're on and the groups that either historically have been there, are there now, feel some sort of ownership. And I don't mean that in a legal lease business kind of way. I just mean like, hey, I'm connected to this land and this place, and I've put in sweat equity here. And so building relationships with them to understand why they feel, why they rightly feel, that they have some time and space that they on the land, why they feel that they have a say. And so building those relationships so that essentially where the wellness center, where the 7 acres is located, it's on traditionally O'odham territories. It's in a historically Black neighborhood that is basically turning into Hispanic or Latino neighborhood at this point, you know? So there's so many elements of communities, and we don't want to just go in there and be like, hey, we want to start this wellness center. Everybody come, you know, access your services through us. That's not the goal, right? So how to do that in an intentional way by including various community partners. The nice thing is that it's not, I hope for the folks that experience this coming in, that we don't feel like a fly-by-night organization. I hope that they feel like, no, we've heard about you all. We actually know you all, even if we haven't met you. And so sitting at the table and envisioning that space with them. One more important point, and I'll close this, is that the way that we came to that space and that land is because there is an abandoned cemetery on that land. And so our local government officials, our council member, because we say we support urban Indigenous families from womb to tomb, said, hey, you all would be great stewards for this land. And so there's also that piece, right? There's an ancestral piece to what we're doing. And I think just being really clear about who we are and always lining up or aligning with that which fits our goals, our mission, our values, being willing to not accept or not align with things that clearly don't align with us. And doing, I appreciate Dr. Isela's words, the tension and the conflict resolution around, oh, we thought this was a good partnership, maybe we got to back up. Or for us, it usually looks like being very careful about the relationships that we start and being very slow and intentional, because in our way, it's very difficult to break relationships. We don't break them easily. So we're going to go slowly. And so there's a certain pace we have to avoid the need to break a relationship, which is different than, I'm not saying avoiding tension or conflict. We have to work through that, right? But if there's a certain alignment, we can always go back to that alignment, whether it's ceremonial, whether it's work-driven, whether it's organizationally philosophical. So I did my best on that question. I hope that wraps most things up.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for that. Maha, there was a lot there. What resonated with you, you know, first and foremost, but also, you know, you could then dig into your work as well too, you know, around racial healing and different things like that.
Yeah, greetings everybody. You know, honored to be here, and you know, yeah, a lot that Anjali said like really resonated with me. One of the first things I think was what you mentioned at the end about like how to create that table and how to walk slowly, right? Because I think part of this racial healing work, which everybody today has spoken of, is how we're developing these deep relationships, you know, and that takes time, you know what I mean? So we talk about depth over speed, you know what I mean? Like how do we prioritize building these deep relationships and these deep connections, right? That level of trust that is more powerful than the status quo, right? More powerful than the forces of the status quo, that we can, you know, press through obstacles and barriers that are along our way, right? And so really focusing in on that. And I think this notion of our interdependence, you know, like how we are a single garment of destiny, as King would say, or, you know, African philosophy will be Ubuntu, you know, that I am because of you are, and that my humanity is tied to your humanity and your humanity is tied to my humanity, right? And then, you know, from that standpoint, we know we have a shared future. So then the question is like how are we going to build our shared future together? And I appreciate, you know, and actually I miswent by not acknowledging, you know what I mean, that the Miami and the shiny land that I am on, right? Because when we're talking about Dayton, you know, I think context is important, right? And understanding like the history of the land, right? So we have 5 rivers that meet in Dayton, and so there was like a powerful space for First Nation and Indigenous people to meet and to gather and to trade, right? And so like I think that's an important part of the Dayton story, you know, which later led to industrialization and then the deindustrialization as GM and everything left, right? So that's part of the context that we're working in. And we also had, I would say, deep levels of redlining, right? Where, you know, like to this day, right? 98%, like the river actually is significant because it also divides East and West Dayton, you know what I mean? Where, you know, there's still people that like will not cross the river, you know what I mean? So to show how deep the divide is in our community, right? We're very, was known as a hyper-segregated city, right? And so we have 98% African-Americans living on the west side, 94% of white living on the east side, along with the Turkish, Latino, and African refugee community, right? And so that's significant because in 2014, coming off of like our origin story is kind of interesting, right? Because on some levels, it came out of the tragedy of John Crawford III that was shot at a Walmart in 0.3 seconds. And the community rallied around that. And so as you know, at the time, we had 40,000 residents on the west side of Dayton and no full service grocery store. Right. And so people were having to take, you know, 2 buses to get to a grocery store or go into a corner store, paying exorbitant prices for whatever kind of food they could get, et cetera, et cetera. And so these maps came out that measured opportunity, which they said conditions favorable for the attainment of a goal. And what was clear is that like all the west side, the Black side was low and very low opportunity. Right. And so we kind of leveraged the group that had gathered for John Crawford III to start having dialogues about like what we could do as a community. And one of the salient things was how to build a grocery store. So that's kind of like the origins of how we came together. And out of that process, we built Co-op Dayton, which is kind of complex, right? So we are a co-op development organization that focus on technical skills to develop co-ops and also movement building, or like kind of going off what Asila said, like building the relationship network, right? Like how we're building this trust and you know, realizing living into our interdependence and our humanity as a way to increase our cooperation, collaboration, you know, coordinated effort, right? Because the goal is like, how do we get our gifts into the center of the circle, right? And so on the co-op development side, we have the Gem City Market is our flagship, you know, 15,000 square foot grocery store with a teaching kitchen, health clinic, and community room. Then we have a doula co-op named Tribe, which stands for Trauma Resiliency and Informed Birth Education. We have a makerspace, we have a mushroom co-op, we have the Heart, which is a house of healing arts. And so like how we're building like an economy, a just economy, while we're also repairing relationships, right? So we're talking about like, if we're gonna live into a more beloved community, what is the economy of that, right? And so like we're working on how to build the economy while at the same time, how to restore, heal these intergenerational wounds, right? As we realize, you know, I used to say, building a shared future from a divided past, right? But I think the key is understanding that we have a shared future regardless. And so like how we're going to be intentional about what that future is, you know? And so, yeah, we just do work in the community. And I feel that like co-ops in general are a way to catalyze beloved community, right? Because it gives the communities chance to build our self-determination, right? Because one of our big, you know, I'm an action researcher. And so it's like, how do we continue the process of transforming recipients into co-creators, right? Because in areas that's been underdeveloped intentionally, oftentimes, you know, we are overpromised and underdelivered, and sometimes we lack the sense of the power that we have, right? And so like we strive to like help the community realize the gifts and the talents that we have. You know what I mean? It's not about competition, right? It's like how do we see each other and see the full gifts, right? And emerge. The other thing that Anjali said that I really appreciated was, you know, building that shared vision. Like what is the North Star, you know, that we can build our collective hope. Like what is our vision for the future and how we leverage our gifts and talents towards making it happen. So I think I'll stop there. Probably talk too much, but yeah.
No, thank you all for that. And just thinking through like what you're saying, right? So I know that we'll definitely touch on trust a little bit later on, but also just like thinking through the intergenerational trauma, right? Because it's one thing to kind of talk about like harms that were done, but Maha, you mentioned those rivers, right? Sometimes the built environment is also like a place to kind of show like the racism or structural racism that is like really still there and like in our faces, right? So then those constant stressors, right? So I was listening to this podcast and how constant stressors can really like, you know, alter your DNA at some point, right? And these things can also make you sicker, right? So then this is then talking about the need for racial healing, and then what are those things, right? So, and kind of thinking about that, right? And then thinking about structures, thinking about development. I do want to go back to Anjali for a quick second, right? So you mentioned, of course, you know, based on like you know, on our conversations about the collective, right? So reproductive justice, birth equity, food justice, land restoration. These are all things that are key components to work, you know, that are around healing, right? And also we recognize that healing and what it entails and means may differ between communities and organizations. So I just want you to just explain, you know, once again, 3-4 minutes, how you see the community development sector and why they should consider racial healing, you know, to be like an important component in their goal to create healthier communities.
Sure. And somebody give me the 3 to 4 minute signal, like, you know, at the 3rd minute. So picking up off of, interrupt me. Like it's yes, there are like 700 people in here, but we're like 700 friends, right? We all know what it is. Like there's a mess behind all of us and we have our blurred background. So, you know, it's all normal. We're all human. Okay. So, picking up off of what Amma said also of that shared vision, I actually think that that's a place sometimes where if there's not a shared vision, that's a good example of inconsistent alignment. And this, I have to be, you know, honest and say something challenging of that, like, we're not intended to work with everyone in the same way that our healing route is not through everyone. It is possible to support people and to support organizations and to support communities without feeling that you have to heal with them or alongside them. And I say that because it's burdensome. It's burdensome to me to, you know, to believe that there is one model that will address everyone. We are as complex. At the same time, are there universals? Of course, everybody wants to be seen as a human being. Everyone wants to be treated, you know, kindly. Everyone wants sovereignty, right? So, and that definition is different for all of us. So in my most basic definition of sovereignty, it's I want to be able to live the way freely, live the way that I and my communities desire to live. And I want to be able to like actualize that in space, you know, on land with my body, right? I want to be able to live the way I want to live, right? My community wants to be able to live the way you want to live. For us, land restoration, that's important, and I want to give definitions. It's because we're guests. I am a perpetual guest, right? So my mom is Maya, my dad is Afro-Cubano, so we're Taino and Arawak. I'm not from these territories, but I'm living here. I feel rooted. Thanks. I've made this home. But I have to engage this place as a guest, realizing that there's all of these backgrounds and different, I don't even want to use the word hierarchies, but different lived realities. And so to try to say like, we can ignore them, that is not possible. We have to engage them, right? And then the part of me being a good guest or the collective being good guests is that we are going to engage all those realities and act as a guest, which primarily means a lot of asking for permission, right? But to us, think also part of being a good guest is knowing who you are and who you walk in, how you walk in, and what it is that you're bringing to the table. So it doesn't mean that you have to be exceptionally deferential and that you cannot, you know, like feel like you know who you are and feel like you have a desire to create a certain goal. It just means that you have, you know, that this is this balance, right? And I don't even want to use strong language like have to. It's this balance between who are you, what are you bringing, what is the history of the space, building relationships with folks that you can kind of move forward and heal with. And then the one last thing, and then kind of why, you know, community sector should consider this, because land and space and water remember. And so the cemetery that is a part of the 7 acres is the best example. That cemetery is 150 years old. Talk about delayed healing, talk about delayed restoration, right? Talk about delayed reconciliation. That land remembers. It's just been waiting for us and other people, to do this healing work. That will always be there. It might not happen in your lifetime that history comes to light, but it's always there, and it's going to show up in one form or fashion in the work.
I love that. Land and space and water, remember, right? These things are always here, always. We are visitors. So that's important to remember. So Amaha, I want to just open it up to you to respond to that, but also, talk about the community development sector too, and then how you see, that sector playing a role, in healthier communities and healing as well.
All I can say is yes, yes, yes. But that was fire, right? And the first thing that comes to my mind is that you're making me like, realize the importance of orientation, right? Like how we see ourselves in relationship to others, I think is critical. You know what I mean? So like if it's a lens of cultural humility or just understanding like we are a piece in amongst other pieces, and like learning like our relationships amongst each other. If it's land, if it's other people, I think that orientation is so important, right? Because like that King talked about that revolution of values, you know what I mean? And so so to me, like we're talking about structural and deep work, right? Like I'm a sociologist, right? So I look at ideology or ideas plus resources equal structure, right? And so like if we're going so we got to do this deep work to go to understand like what are these values that we're actually living into that we're then adding our resources, our time, gift, and talents to build the structures of a new world that we're stepping into, right? Like what is this new story, right? What are the narratives, right, that we're co-creating amongst each other, right? And how we're using those as our praxis, right? That we can step deeper in and build an example. Like there's one quote by Buckmaster Fuller, like not trying to dismantle the old, but build a compelling that makes the old obsolete, right? And so like how are we showing that another world is possible by our lived experience that invites others in, right? And so to me, when we're looking at community development, I think and working with the sector, I think to me the key is who are the knowledge creators, right? Like, oftentimes, people that have the PhDs and this, that, and other, they feel that they know what is best for the community, right? So they're doing things for the community instead of doing things with the community, right? And so like the community has the experience, right? Like Ella Baker would tell you that like those close to the issue understand the issue the best, right? And so like how are we centering our knowledge on the most marginalized, the people that actually understand the outputs of these structures and systems, right? That we can then use their experience to reimagine the systems, right? And reimagine the community, right? So I think that if we're going to build like collective impact, if we're going to build spaces where we're all like working together and leveraging our gifts and talents, that is key that those that have been left on the margins are in the center and are driving the work, right? And that we're building power with instead of power over, right? That we're learning how to share power, you know what I mean? Which sometimes in community development is hard because people feel because they got resources, they got this, that, and the other, that they know what's best and they're going to dictate the future. But no, you know what I mean? The power rests within the people, right? And so like how are we co-creating what we want to see together by using our experience as a guide and connecting our experiences together, realizing that sometimes we experience things in isolation and we don't realize, no, like there's multiple people having these same experiences. So then we can say, are these experiences that we want and don't want? And if they're not, like how are those the catalysts towards driving, change and transformation?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think part of me wants to kind of really dig a little bit deeper, like into the trust, because I think that, y'all both talked about it. Dr. Isela talked about it as well too, right? So what are ways that, that y'all kind of built trust with your communities, but also like in a way where you can sense that they feel like they're being heard, right? So I think that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about is like that trust building, because then that, and then turns to other things as well too, solidarity and different things like that. So just trying to see what you all think about trust, and also like what are some of the things and like you've done, you know, as professionals and also community members to kind of build that trust.
I'll start. Okay, so I think internally, right, feedback, right, is I think a really good way, like hearing feedback, right, and creating space for feedback and debriefing around the things that you do, I think is often like a really important indicator, so you can hear from someone else or other orgs or other spaces how they felt with you. So if I were to share out the things that people share when they kind of enter a collective space, you know, the collective space, it's that it feels particularly welcoming. They can absolutely feel ceremony and protocol and like, oh, hold on, y'all are doing something here. And I say that in a doing something here in a ceremonial way, like y'all are taking care of things, right, through this process, things, internal things, spiritual things beyond, right? In addition to, you're also changing the light bulb. In addition to, you're also, you know, giving birthing parents, right, access to have the labor and delivery that they desire. So hearing that feedback, hearing that they feel accepted, I think that is something that we heard this past week or 2 weekends ago, as we've built a sacred community birth worker training that is essentially a Black and Indigenous training, right? Figuring out and making sure that the space feels open enough for everyone to feel that they are heard and spoken to, and that mostly that they can also share and speak. How we do that, I think for us, it goes back to ceremony, you know, because that's our essentializing factor, right? That does kind of go away, like goes out of the space of phenotype, right? If we kind of connect spiritually first, right, for us, that I think is what creates common ground. And then also, it doesn't mean as an erasure to phenotype. It doesn't mean as an erasure to racial dynamics. I think it sets the tone of like, here's this heart connection first. And so we know this, there are more similarities between us than differences, right? But if we can build on what is similar and the shared experiences, then it creates the glue to be able to work through the tensions that will inevitably hit. Like, for example, I'd like to bring this part into ceremony. I'd like to bring this part into the program. I'd like to bring this part. Okay, well, like help walk us through like, what's that going to look like? What are the protocols? What's that program going to look like? Who's going to organize that, right? Okay, cool. There are gaps and holes and we need to work through that conversation, as opposed to it feeling like maybe someone's being pushed away or you can't be in this space, right? Those aren't words we would ever use, you know? I think, and then for the land example, we have worked with organizations that are like abolitionist focused organizations. We are working, there's no have, you know? At different times, having some conversations around, okay, maybe your strategy is really different than ours. And so help me understand why you are using that strategy and what your outcome and your stated goal is. And let me tell you how organizationally, let our org tell us how we receive that and how it's actually conflicting a little bit with how we would move forward. So then how do we kind of figure this part out in first starting in conversation and having the rigor to stay there and come back in the following weeks when there was a rub, you know, and then deciding when we need external help. Like, so do we need a shared facilitator because we can't see ourselves? So Amasadi's a sociologist, I'm a psychologist, right? So this internal processing, it's actually really hard for us to see ourselves. We think we're right. We don't like to think that we've done things wrong, you know, that's just humanity. And so having enough places and people around you that you trust to give you feedback, and then mostly using time, you know, all the comments and that have been in the chat around like building at the speed of trust. I'll stop there. I could say more.
Amaha, do you want to respond to that?
I say, yeah. I mean, I think one of the pivotal pieces that, you know, that we live by, and also I think is simultaneously challenging the dominant narrative is, you know, movements move at the speed of trust, right? And so like how to focus on being deep relational and creating a space of belonging, right? Like I think space making is a huge role, right? And I appreciate what Anjali said about grounding in the sacredness, you know, and so I think one of the ways that we've been focusing on building trust is circle, you know, like holding circle holding dialogue, you know what I mean? We're doing intergenerational dialogues right now, you know what I mean? About like how to really connect the elders with the younger generations, that we can learn from each other and heal these intergenerational wounds, even amongst people that have similar identities, right? Let alone those that may have different identities, right? But I think a lot of this it's how to build trust, right? And, you know, trust is also often seen as social capital, right? And so it's like, which then translates into power, right? So I think like the key is like how we're building the space to enable greater cooperation and collaboration. And so like we kind of do this two ways, because like we're building a solidarity economy, right? So we have, you know, about like 7-8 co-ops that we're trying to like continue to work on, like how we're building a solidarity economy amongst the co-ops in our ecosystem, and then also how we're building trust with the greater community, that, you know, that there's no distinction, right? That like we're all like working together of like building an economy for the future that we're trying to create, you know, amongst each other. And so I think deep relationships is the key. Like there's no way around it, and that's like a continuous theme that we've been seeing. And how do we create space for the voice and of the community to come forward, right? And how do we participate? I would say like one of our probably superpowers is that we're highly collaborative, right? So like throughout this whole process, right, it was from naming the market to our mission statement. You know, we had 200 people in a basement working on our mission statement together, right? At our grand opening, everybody had a shovel at our grand opening, right? Because like it was important to us that like everybody knows that we're doing it, and everybody has the chance to add their voice into this, you know, like a soup, you know what I mean? Everybody's adding their piece, you know what I mean? And we're growing it. And our participation is crucial, because when people feel heard and not like heard in the meeting, but like they already know the decisions were made in the back door, and you know what I mean, but like how they can actually participate in the process, that builds more trust, right? And that builds hope too, because I think like, you know, hope is our ability to release power, and like, you know, the more hopeful I am, the more I'm going to put my gift into the center of the circle, right? And so it's like how are we allowing people to not allowing, that's a horrible word, like how are we co-creating together, right? That, you know, it becomes a shared we, right? Because ultimately, you know, I think it's all of this work is about how we're expanding our we, you know what I mean? Like you said, Kevin, about building that solidarity, that shared identity, you know what I mean? Especially in a world that teaches us that we're individuals. So that's why I think trust is so important.
No, definitely. Thank y'all both. And kind of thinking about that, right? Thinking about trust, but also thinking about the opposite, thinking about distrust, right? So I know that we have technically 10 minutes left. So I do want to move into the Q&A portion, but also kind of a question that we still haven't really like talked about, which is healthcare, right? So I think I just want to open it up and really ask, I think like a couple of things, right? So what are some real tangible ways that healthcare institutions can be a true solution to racial healing work, right? And if you can just talk about a little bit of your experience partnering or working with healthcare institutions and talking through those power dynamics, and then, you know, just making the healthcare institutions kind of understand like, you know, what their role is in this work. So I'll throw it up there, and whoever wants to talk about it, y'all can hop in.
I'll go. I'm always willing to talk. Okay. I'm going to try to be like really bullet pointish because I think a lot of people have things to say. I think one, we've already said, centering community, what that tangibly looks like, advisory councils, bringing folks in, paying them for their time to come in and advise. I think the margins to center work that essentially Amma was talking about, right? Making sure that whomever has the least voice you're always considering like, how would they access this thing that we're creating? And I really would say, and do the work of creating your own thing. When you are creating your own food forest, when you're creating your own wellness center, you have to think through so much of, okay, what are the power dynamics? Where does the money filter through? You have to walk in both worlds. And then it humbles you and it helps you understand the complexity, right? And so do that work of trying to create something and work through the relationships. what else was I going to say? I think also being willing to not accept funds and not accept support that doesn't align with you, and being brave enough to be like to be patient enough to wait if something is accepting something is going to take you in your organization in a different track. I think that's been one of the good things that the collective has done. We will not accept support or help or alignment if it doesn't fit us. I'll stop there because there's so much more I could say.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that, right? And yeah, I want to go deeper into what you said about paying the participants, right? Because oftentimes, there's some people that are like, it's part of their job and they're in these meetings, and there's others that it's not part of their job, right? And so like making sure that like people are compensated for their work, like that's the way that I think that we show value to their knowledge and to their expertise, like when we were creating and I want to co-sign everything you said, actually. And when we were creating the market, we built a health equity case, right? That we showed that, like, through the underdevelopment, that it was having the disparate health outcomes, right? If it was, 2 times the infant mortality death for Black and brown babies, right? And that the lack of access to food, how that was impacting education and impacting health, right? And so then we started working with, we were able to actually to bring all the 3 major health networks together to work on the Gem City market, and now with Tribe, which is the doula co-op, right? It's like how to support, doulas are not like fully like a thing in Ohio yet, right? So how to work on policy, like we're working with the healthcare systems about developing policy around that. And also, understanding that doulas can have a deeper relationship with the people in the community. And so like, how can the health agencies support that? And I think the other thing is how to build trust, right? And part of that is acknowledging the deep wounds that's been there, right? And I think it's challenging because in systems, like some of the people that are like more the outward facing, we can develop deep relationships and trust, right? But then like, how do we know that the institutional power also warrants that same relationship, right? And that's where I think it's challenging, because like if we're going to share our data, our experiences, this, that, and the other, how do we know that like, that everybody's in alignment, you know what I mean? And big institutions that have been operating the status quo for so long, may have good intentions, but like their policies and practices, have a history of harm, right? And so like what kind of work are they actually doing to remove that on a fundamental level that they can then show up in the community? Because like we are stronger together, right? And like how can we leverage the gifts and talents and the resources? But that trust is a serious thing, and I think it takes time, and I think it's like Anjali said, centering at the margins to really like allow the voice and the experience of the community to drive the process and allow their experiences with, like, so we say food apartheid and not food desert, right? In part because we want to change the language of the conversation, you know what I mean? And so like how are we utilizing language and to help build these new type of relationships, new spaces and containers where institutions and community can work in greater alignment. Sorry, I'm rambling.
It's all good. It's all good. Isela, let me bring you in really fast. So
yeah, I'd love to jump in real quick on this piece here in terms of what can healthcare or like systems, institutions really do. Folks have already said really great stuff, and I agree with all of them. I think one thing that we can talk about too that systems can do that probably don't do as much because it's hard to do when you're an institution is it's not just bring and center voice, it's share power. It's actually say, and I'm going to give you some leeway here with budget, because that now we're talking about actually sharing, because we're talking about power and resources. And so some of our TRHTs did just that. Like, here's our community bucket of like, here's our funds, here's our resources. And you all get to decide what we're going to do with those after we like build the thing and after we decide what we want to work on together. And I think that's a really good demonstration of how institutions can actually build that trust, is saying, it's not just listening to you. It's if we really mean that, that means decision making, and that means over budgets too. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to push. I'm going to try to do one more question. I know we got 4 minutes left. So I think, Isela, let me throw this to you first, and then the rest of the panelists, y'all can hop in, right? So obviously we have some people who are on the call who are in rural areas, maybe even rural conservative areas, right? How would you think about introducing some racial healing work to those areas? And also, how do we deal with resistance and denial to racial healing work?
Dr. Anjali talked about this earlier, and I love when she said, you know, not everybody is heading the same way, and not everybody is going to be your community, and not everybody's ready, and you don't got to deal with everybody's stuff. But there's got to be some ways that you can find who your people are, right? Who's going to be partners in this work. And about going really slowly makes a lot of sense. You can't rush that part. And you've got to be thinking about whether or not in rural communities, whether there is appetite for that, whether you've got like a critical mass of folks who want to do this work and be in community together. And I think that's part of it. One of our TRHTs is in Alaska, and that's a rural place. So you know, when we say rural, like what do we really mean? And like, how do we engage? Are we talking about engaging conservative politicians or conservative people? People with conservative views, like what does all that really mean? How are we in conversation? There's ways to start those conversations, but you just got to start grappling with, are we ready for those conversations, and how do we get ready? And again, there's resources on that TRHT site, healourcommunities.org, if you want to look at that. And also I'm always down for a conversation too. So I'll stop there to let others jump in.
Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. You know, one thing that I feel that I have not said enough is being rooted in love, right? And like having that be like our grounding principle within all this work, right? And I think you know, when working, you know, in rural areas or working with people across, you know, differences, you know, like how are we acknowledging our human dignity, right? And how are we exploiting all areas of agreement? You know, like we don't have to agree on every single thing to move forward on what we already agree upon, right? And I think that's like the biggest thing when you're building like broad scale collaboration, you know, is how to like identify like yeah, these are the areas, these are our common ouches, you know what I mean, that we can work together to resolve, or like what we can do to move the dial with the things that we have in our ability to do. And you know, for us, like we're helping build, you know, we're working in a process to build food system sovereignty, right? And so within that, like rural is a key part, right? And so like how do we get out of the divides that people put us in, you know what I mean, to really like see how we can leverage, you know, the power of both towards, you know, creating this world that we're trying to live into.
I really don't have a lot to add. I mean, I could restate in, you know, in like what would be this TC's fashion, but I don't want to take away, you know, and I would just amplify time equity, sweat equity, recognition, seeing, kind of identifying shared and common values, doing your inner work, and speaking to the conflict, you know, so that it's not going to get resolved, it's not spoken to, you know. And the conflict is also typically, I think, a good indicator of the strength of your relationship if and when resolved. And then if not, you know, it's a good indication of the strength of the relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, honestly, we are at time. So thank y'all for hanging on with us. I think it was so many great things that was said today, obviously. But before we head out of here, and then I'll talk about my outro, is there like a 1 minute, you know, take home point that you all have that you can share with the audience? Anyone can start.
Go ahead. No, I feel like I've been sharing a lot. Okay. So I'm looking forward to your outro because you have really good songs, Kevin, really good music. Anyway, I repeat, know yourself, know your community, know your org, start there first. It's messy if you don't have a strong sense of yourself. And if for some reason that the sense of self has been stripped from you because of historical factors, root back to land, root back to, because land will always remind you, and it is a process for waking up that ancestral DNA, regardless of our lived histories. And then once that occurs, then try to push on the systems that you can push on respectfully and in a way that attempts to maintain a relationship with the person or the group that you're pushing against.
Yeah, thanks. I would, focusing in on doing the internal work, right? Because like the more we understand the power of fractals and that the small creates the large, right? It's like how are we doing this internal work to occupy certain spaces on the earth that can then reverberate out, you know what I mean? And so being inward focused instead of just always outward focused first. And I would say building the compelling, I think it's so to me, like we have to be an invitation into the world we're trying to create, right? And so the more that we are building the thing that people are aspiring towards, then the fragrance of that draws people into this work, you know what I mean? And that's how we build hope as, people's gifts and talents, the more they see and believe that something's authentic, the more they're going to want to add their gifts into the center of the circle, right? And I think like that's how we, move our communities forward.
I can jump in and just say something really quick. For those of you that work in the institutions that we're talking about, we know that people make up institutions, but that some of these institutions have just been going on and on and on. If you work in an institution, I think I would just invite you to think about the fact that community isn't the problem, right? They're a true partner, and we need to see them that way, because as folks have already said, people closest to the issues are the experts in their experience, and we have to do more than just listen. We have to step aside and actually let community lead, and we need to source that as institutions, and that's how we can help repair and build trust in community. And we need to honor community for its knowledge and its life ways in a really holistic way. And thinking about, people already said this too, but thinking about who's not in those conversations and bringing them in. And we got to start somewhere, but that all begins with a truthful account of where we really are, why, before we can really get to where we want to go. And there's hope in doing that work. Folks talked about this. We've seen that it's possible, and we need to do it if we expect and want our children and families to thrive.
Thank y'all very much, for real. Appreciate y'all, providing the insight and the information today. Anjali, I don't have any music today. I wish I should have played something, but next time, 90 minutes and music. So I'll definitely buffer in some time to do so. But once again, thank y'all again. Appreciate it. Just a few things before we close down. If you miss any of this portion of today's discussion, we'll post it online on our website, which should also be in the chat pretty soon. Also, we have our latest article in the BHPN's essay series called The Crosswalk Magazine. The article explores how the community development sector is addressing mental health and features BIPOC CDCs who are promoting racial healing to support residents' well-being. And it also includes one of our different awardees, Virginia Community Voice. So that will also be in the chat as well. So, and one last thing, in the coming months, we are also doing more things around racial healing. We're producing a resource, still try to emphasize why racial healing is so important to community health, and then working with healthcare and different things like that. So last thing I'll say, as we are over time, but it's totally okay. Finally, if you're interested in learning any more about the cross, sector collaboration and like to attend any future events, sign up for our newsletter, The Pulse. And we are also putting in a survey at the end right now, in the chat as well too, about today's session. So feel free to talk about those things and let us know how today's session went. Otherwise, we'll see you all next time. Enjoy your day. Beautiful conversation. Thank y'all very much.